Okay, thank you, everybody. We're gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the Board of Finance meeting for the town of Andover, Wednesday, November 29th, 2022. We will go ahead and start by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands
one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You. Okay, our first item on the agenda is public speak. Anybody, members of the public, who want to speak? We just have our guests and other opportunities, so we'll move on to item 3, which is changes or additions to the agenda. Anybody have any additions or changes to propose to the agenda?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and take a motion.
I'd like to, revisit the idea of going back to the Zoom meetings, possibly for the winter season and, for things like this, so that, I'll leave that for discussion, but.
So you have to make a
revisit
motion.
it. Oh, I'd like to make a motion to,
We would add it probably under new business 6B.
okay. Okay, can we put, I'd like to add an item 6B to revisit discussion on going back to Zoom meetings.
Okay, anybody want a second?
Second it for discussion.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Was that a yes, Bill?
That was a yes.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? No, motion passes. We'll add an item 6B. Discussion of returning to virtual meetings. Okay, any other changes or additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to our next agenda item. This is the review with the auditor of the 2022 financial statements, so.
All right, so for those of you who don't know, this is Mike. He's our auditor from Moen Sable.
Hey, Mike, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Right, and I assume everyone has gotten copies of the 22 financial statements and related reports.
Wow.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And so, thank you very much again. My name is Mike Van Devener. I'm a partner at Moen Sable, ultimately responsible for overseeing the audit work and issuing the reports on behalf of the firm. Again, I am going to run through our presentation that really, provides a high-level overview of the results of the audit, and then also items that would be of importance to you as board of finance members. So, if we could turn to slide 2 of the presentation. In terms of the scope of work, we did perform an audit of the town's financial statements. We performed that audit in accordance with both the auditing standards issued by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, as well as the government auditing standards issued by the Government Accountability Office. In addition, based on the level of state funding that was received and expended by the town, we did also perform a state single audit in accordance with the Connecticut State Single Audit Act. The town did not meet the threshold for a federal single audit. I do not anticipate you meeting that threshold in 2023 either. In addition, we do also perform an agreed upon procedures on the end of the school year reports that are filed by the school district to the Connecticut Department of Education. In addition to those, what we call audit services, we do also perform some non-audit services for the town. So we do assist in the preparation of the financial statements, as well as the schedule of expenditures of state financial assistance and related notes. And then we also assist in converting your governmental fund financial statements to your government-wide financial statements. So again, It's important to note that in order for us to be independent, management is required to ultimately accept responsibility for these services. And again, Cheryl, the treasurer, ultimately accepted responsibility for the service. In connection with our audit, we do issue a number of reports. The primary report is the report on the financial statements. We did issue unmodified clean opinions on your financial statements. Again, our opinion does provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from a material misstatement and that they have been prepared in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. Our opinion does cover multiple statements within your financial statements. It covers your governmental activities, each of your major funds, which for the town was your general fund and your capital reserve fund. And then we provide an opinion on the overall aggregate remaining fund information, and that includes all of your special revenue, capital projects, and permanent funds. The one item I like to point out here is, again, we do only provide reasonable assurance. It's not absolute assurance. We do not test every transaction of the town. We do utilize sampling in our audit methodology, and therefore we do not provide absolute assurance. In connection with the state single audit, we issue a report on compliance and on internal control at the state financial assistance level. For fiscal year 2022, the total state financial assistance recognized by the town was about $2.8 million. The majority of that is considered exempt from our testing. The portion that was not was about $774,000. The town's major programs were the Town Aid Road, the Let's Go Connecticut Ramp Up Transportation Program, and the Small Town Economic Assistance Program. We did issue unmodified clean opinions on your compliance over those programs, and we did not report any findings. Again, the primary compliance requirements with these programs is allowable cost, and we're performing testing to make sure that you're charging what you should be charging against those grants. In connection with our audit, we do also issue a report on compliance and on internal control over financial reporting. I do think it's important to note that in this report, we do not actually express an opinion on your compliance with laws and regulations or on the effectiveness of your internal controls over financial reporting. Essentially, during the course of performing our audit, if we become aware of or identify a material non-compliance with a law or regulation or a material weakness in your internal controls, we're required to include it in this report. So if you do remember in 2021, we did have a number of findings, material weaknesses and significant deficiencies that were reported. Again, we did have some repeat findings for fiscal year 2022. I will say, however, that from an audit perspective, the audit was much smoother and the issues that we had were substantially less. And as a result, again, we did remove some of those deficiencies that we reported in 2021. The deficiencies that remained was a material weakness in internal control over financial reporting with respect to the bank reconciliations. Again, from a context perspective, the bank recs were in much better shape than they were in the prior year, but there were still some issues that were identified as part of the audit process. Again, recommendation, the accurate and timely bank reconciliations are really essential for ensuring the integrity of your overall general ledger. Those reconciliations should be fully reconciled in a timely manner, and there should be a documented supervisory review of those bank reconciliations. The second finding that was repeated was a significant deficiency in internal control over the year-end closing procedures. Again, there's still a number of adjustments that were proposed as a result of the audit process. Those adjustments related to properly reporting certain year-end accruals and deferrals, also associated with property tax receivables and deferrals. And then also to properly reconcile activity to support conversion entries that are required to prepare your government-wide financial statements, including your capital assets, compensated absences, and total OPEB liability. So again, historically, from an audit perspective, oftentimes auditors would assist with a lot of this work as part of the audit process. Our standards have become a little bit more stricter over the years. Really, that responsibility does fall on town personnel and management to perform those reconciliations. And then the third deficiency that was a repeat, was the deficiency over the reconciliation between the towns and school district general ledgers. This obviously also has an impact on the bank reconciliations as well. So again, the fact that the ledgers are not integrated, creates, some difficulties in terms of, a lot of manual entries having to be recorded on both sides and making sure that those entries mirror each other and ultimately are reconciled on a monthly basis. So again, there were some issues with that reconciliation in connection with the fiscal year 2022. So in regards to these findings, again, management was responsible for preparing a corrective action plan and submitting that corrective action plan to the Office of Policy and Management. Again, from a board perspective, you would like to oversee that corrective action plan and make sure that the corrective actions that have been outlined are being taken by the town. Before I move on to financial highlights, any questions regarding either the scope of work or the audit findings that were reported? All right, just to provide a really, again, high-level overview of the financial highlights. Again, the financial statements do include a number of statements. I know the primary statement that the board is most familiar with is the general fund on a budgetary basis. Your original budget did provide for the utilization of fund balance in the amount of $285,000 to balance the revenues and expenditures. Your final budget did include additional appropriations of $40,000, and that resulted in an overall clean use of fund balance in the amount of $325,000. Your actual change in fund balance was a decrease of $155,000, and so that resulted in an overall favorable budgetary variance of about $169,000. Your revenues were approximately $116,000 more than budgeted. That was really driven by favorable collections on your property taxes, building permits, and town clerk fees. And then your overall actual expenditures were approximately $53,000 less than what was budgeted. The next slide goes over your governmental fund financial statements. So this includes your general fund on a GAAP basis, as well as all of your special revenue and capital project funds. Overall, the town reported a combined ending fund balance of about $3.8 million. That was a nominal increase of about $5,000 from the prior year. Of the $3.8 million, the general fund was reporting an ending fund balance of about $1.4 million, a decrease of about $155,000 from the prior year. You did assign $100,000 for use in your fiscal year 2023 budget. That left an unassigned fund balance of about $1.3 million, and that represented approximately 10.2% of your fiscal year 2023 budgetary expenditure appropriations. That's sufficient to cover about 1.2 months of your overall budgetary expenditures. The GFOA does recommend that all governments, regardless of size, maintain about 2 months. That's probably around 17% of for a fund balance. Again, we generally see it anywhere between 10 and 20%. Fund balance reserves are really based on the overall risk of the town, the environment. Again, if you live by the shore, maybe you need a higher fund balance reserve because you deal with, hurricanes, storms, and unplanned emergency costs.
No, but remember, we also have a considerable amount of money in capital funds that
Correct.
could be tapped if we needed to.
Yep.
So,
And so that brings up the next point, your capital reserve funds, you have about 1.3 million, which was an increase of about 37,000 from the prior year. Again, those amounts are committed for specific capital purposes. You are reporting a deficit in the transfer station shed repair fund of about 7,000. Again, that deficit's been carried forward from prior years. Recommendations just to fund that deficit through either the budget process or through a transfer during the year. All of your other funds had an ending fund balance of about $1 million, which is an increase of about 123,000. Those amounts are either restricted or committed for various purposes. Again, there are detailed combining schedules of each of those funds in the financial statement. This next section is our required communications. Again, our auditing standards do require certain communications as a result of the audit. The first item here talks about our responsibility under the auditing standards. Again, although we do assist in the preparation of the financial statements, they are the responsibility of town management. It's our responsibility to perform our procedures and express our opinion on those financial statements. The overall plan, scope, and timing of the audit. Again, no changes in the overall scope of the audit work that was performed. There were multiple extensions from OPM that were required. Those delays result to some scheduling constraints on our side. So based on our scheduling issues, we typically don't start the audit until after year end. However, then there were also some issues, regarding some of the deficiencies that were reported in the report on internal control financial reporting that led to some additional delays. With respect to significant audit findings, again, we do review the town's accounting policies and procedures. We do compare those to what other towns or municipalities utilize to determine that they're reasonable. One of the items that we usually point out here is the implementation of any new accounting standards. The big one for fiscal year 2022 was on leases. The impact of that statement was determined to be immaterial to your town's financial statements. However, again, future leases should be analyzed and accounted for in accordance with the statement. In terms of difficulties, no difficulties again outside of some of the additional work and delays that were associated with some of those deficiencies. Ultimately, all of the information that we requested was provided by town personnel. We had no uncorrected misstatements, so any adjustments that we identified as a result of our procedures had been proposed and are reflected in your financial statements. The town did record a prior period restatement to restate its beginning cash balance in the amount of about $163,000. Again, remember there were significant bank reconciliation issues in prior years. There was variances that had been identified being carried forward from prior years. We got to the point where, in connection with this audit, we were comfortable that those variants should be adjusted, and ultimately that was adjusted through a restatement of your beginning cash balance. We had no disagreements with management. We did obtain a representation letter. There were no unusual representations that were requested of management. I just give the example, if we were unable to substantiate a transaction that we selected for testing and we were relying on the representation from management, we would inform that. And we're not aware of any consultations by management with any other independent accountants. So again, with that concludes my communication with respect to the fiscal year 2022 audit. Again, happy to answer any questions that you.
Anyone? Questions?
Thanks for putting up with us.
And I do apologize for the delays in the presentation.
No,
Sorry.
No, thank you for coming. I know I had pulled my packet too, because I think we had some of the things in there, but I mean, just so that I had something to reference, but thank you for this. This is a great overview and hopefully moving forward. So I know we had a couple, at the beginning, you talked about the things that had been, findings that had been, found again or whatever. Are we allowed to ask you at this point, do you feel like changes have been made so that, I know we're talking about this, but moving forward is always our focus so that we don't see them again or?
Right. So I think from my perspective, I mean, certainly, in context, again, you have significant findings, but they were less severe in my eyes in connection with the 22 audit. So I would think that as you continue to address those things and resolve those things, those findings should get remediated. We have not performed any procedures at this point in connection with the fiscal year 23 audit. So I can't really speak to those changes at this time.
Hey, Eric.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm just wondering, can you give me a copy of that presentation?
absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, I guess we're all set then, Mike. Appreciate the time. Eric, you were going to say something. But...
Yeah, I was just gonna say, while we have Mike here, I think now might not be a bad time to talk a little bit about the capital funds And just make sure we're all on the same page regarding the capital funds between us and AES, since ultimately, Mike, as the auditor, is the person that has to bless the, whatever policy we put in place, or not bless the policy, but at least, you know, bless the overall procedure.
Okay.
So. I mean, I think you're aware, basically what we were looking to do is establish a capital fund to fund expenditures, you know, longer term expenditures with AES. And use money, if they underspend their budget for the year. And request it from the Board of Finance, have a mechanism established that we can fund a capital fund from that at the end of the year with surplus funds.
Okay, and so I guess my question is that, are you utilizing the 2% statute in terms of the non-lapsing to establish the fund?
Well, we already have a 2% non-lapsing fund established. In my mind, there's two issues with that. One, in some cases, there's more than 2%. So there's a limitation on how much you can put it in each year. And the second real limitation from my perspective is that I think, given the level of capital expenditures that might be required by a school system, you know, we may need to be budgeting additional monies through our normal appropriation. So in my head, we were looking at a separate capital fund that we could fund through the ordinary budget process, but also put additional revenues in from the school if they had, you know, fairly large unexpended funds at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. So there are several statutes that ultimately can be utilized to establish funds, and then the procedure itself would depend on which statute you're ultimately following. So typically under the 2%, if you were going to establish it in accordance with the kind of the 2%,
Sure.
It would give the Board of Finance the authority to transfer monies from the end of the year surplus for the Board of Education into that fund, right? And then under the statute, it also gives the Board of Education the authority to spend those funds. So Board of Finance authority to move the money, Board of Education the authority to spend it. CNR, typically under the statutes, again, is typically a Board of Finance authority to move unspent funds at the end of the year into a CNR. So you can do that in terms of your, normal general fund budget for town monies. You could also do that for Board of Education monies as well. So I think the approval would also be at the Board of Finance level. But then the actual spending, that would change. It would no longer be under the 2% rule. It would be under your normal appropriation process for capital funds.
That's kind of how we had interpreted it, or formulated it, I think, in our thinking, so.
More or less, yeah. Correct. Yeah, and in keeping with the fact that most of the capital things that are going to be done, even though they'll be done essentially for educational purposes, they're still technically town-owned buildings. And the town still does retain the authority to issue permits and actually do the work. So that's how we were envisioning it. And we just want to make sure from an audit perspective that there's no significant issues with that as long as we follow, we treat that essentially like every other capital fund that we have, even though it's specifically for the school system, not the school system, but for capital expenses related to the school system and property.
Right, and I think what changes in terms of the statute is the authority to spend that money. Right, so under the 2%, it should be the Board of Education. Under the capital, it would be the Board of Finance.
Yeah, and the way that we have drafted it, and we'll get to this later in the meeting, is basically Board of Ed and Board of Finance have to have a meeting of the minds. Board of Ed comes to us and says, we'd like to put in X, we agree, it goes in. They want to spend it, we agree, they spend it. It's their money, right? And they're carved out of some of the procedures based on the town charter. So, but the idea is that it's between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance to sort this out. We drafted a policy that we'll be discussing later tonight, but I don't think anything that you said conflicts with it.
Can I just ask?
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to, because one of my questions was going to be, do we really need the 2% non-lapsing any longer, or is that a protection so that, okay?
Isn't that statutory? I don't think.
No, so I mean, the 2% typically the non-lapsing, I mean, I think the idea really behind that was related to special education. And it's the ability to provide the school district, because if you have somebody move in, you know.
Contingency.
Yeah, kind of a contingency, if you
Yeah.
will.
Because I think when we first started talking about this, the only thing was to benefit the Board of Ed at the end of the year. We always knew there was a surplus, and I'd gone to plenty of meetings. I work in a school system where there's a big spend and a push to spend at the end of the year to kind of, you know, stockpile things, which is a good thing, but why not put it in a capital fund to start saving for some of these big projects? And then have a policy procedure. Yeah, oh, yeah.
We know our funds and our accounts, and right now, we don't have a capital fund for school.
Right.
So this is the attempt to create one. The 2% on lapsing, like you said, is more of a contingency fund,
Gotcha.
like special ed, you know this, right? Like, you know, you get one kid, it can be $100,000 hit, like that. So that's what that's for. This is more like, we know we have some issue coming up 5 years down the road that we're gonna have to spend $250,000 on.
Right.
Right, and we wanna be able to load money into that.
Yep.
And have a procedure that everybody agrees on,
Right.
for the use of that money. And instead of having everything run through the ops budget of the school, we just thought that wasn't great.
Right. Yeah, you know, from a best practice perspective, just from a budgeting perspective, obviously incorporating the school district's capital needs into the overall capital needs of the town. You know, for a lot of municipalities, it's part of the capital process. So, you know, it's not as if they have a separate capital fund for the Board of Education and then one for the town. Although this provides you kind of an additional way to fund those investments.
Right.
It's like we've said at meetings too, if that happens and a special education expense comes up, the town is always gonna take care of it. Because if the town, I think Eric or someone has mentioned that, we're going to have to find a way to fund it from a contingency in a town side or.
Right,
So that's-
we have a
it's gonna
statutory
happen.
requirement
Right.
to pay that money if
Right.
it occurs for.
And I understand this is the.
And the 2%
always
on
been-
lapsing helps you not go to a supplemental appropriation anytime that happens.
Yeah.
And that's really what's going,
Yeah.
right? Right, but the other thing is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as it's an education-related capital expense, you can spend out of the 2% non-lapsing education fund
Okay.
for that.
Mhm.
So we certainly could have done the parking lot and paid for it out of that account with their blessing. Now, they don't want to do that because they want to keep that as their reserve. But there is that option. So in my mind, the advantage from their perspective is the 2% is that they maintain control over it. And also, there's a wider range of things they can expend that money for. Whereas the capital fund, you know, that you all maintain control of as a Board of Finance. And that's earmarked specifically for capital. The downside for the school is they don't have as much authority over that. But in truth, technically, you know, for most capital building projects, since they're town structures, you know, they need cooperation from the town to do it anyway. So, you know, it's a narrower focus, is all. Correct.
And
Is
then
that a fair
last-
summation of?
Yeah, and the surplus wouldn't be the only mechanism for funding that capital.
No, we could
incorporate
load
that
money
into
in.
your overall.
Correct.
Budget.
We could go through our budget process and say, you know, the town's gonna put it too. That could be done. I mean, there's nothing in the policy that says the town can't do that. Although it's true that the policy that we drafted is silent on that, but there's no reason. we couldn't.
Yeah, it's part of the budget process.
Right, exactly. Right.
I have a general question, and I brought this up. I was just kind of curious why these funds don't have any vehicle to gain any interest or.
Well, they do in a
Is-
way, because we
Do
put
they?
them, yeah, we put them in the.
We
stipend,
changed it.
and we funded it, yeah.
Fine,
We have-
fine.
Because the policy doesn't relate to that. There's nothing in there stating it.
That's true, and that's a good point. Maybe we could throw something in there about that, but we've recently changed up our town accounts.
If for some reason we decide not to do it.
Right, I mean, there's that state account now that we're using, right? Or
Yeah.
5% interest, where we used to get 0.01 or something ridiculous like that.
Correct.
I think we're using that across the board, right?
So we have 3.2 million, something like that, of town funds in the STIP account currently, earning interest. And that brings up the other point, and that is, what the board, when you originally adopted or motioned to set up this fund, we kind of made it clear that while we were setting up a fund, we were not setting up a standalone bank account for that fund. And the reason is we want to put that money in the STIP account, not keep it in the separate. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we should be able to transfer the bank account that has the 2% non-lapsing account, it's still the school's money, but nothing says that has to be a standalone bank account that's earning 0.1% interest. You know, when we can basically just account for it as a fund
Right,
and put that money in the STIP
there's
account.
no restrictions on the establishment of a separate bank account. So you can pool those funds, you just need to have an accounting system in place to track that.
So just as a heads up, and you guys, I apologize, you guys aren't seeing this, I realize that now looking at it, but Cheryl sent at the beginning of the month, she's been sending updates to Eric and I guess Jeff McGuire, looks like the three of us are copied on there. And she's interest earned in the STIP account for October 2023 was $12,892. So there's a significant amount of
That's good.
interest, it's really, and in some months have been a lot higher.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I was higher in this fund, we've slowly been closing out the smaller bank accounts and moving them over to just with our current bank. So it takes us a little bit of time to be able to move the accounts, close those smaller accounts, get them into the general fund, and then make a transfer from the general fund into the specific. I will admit, I've been a little bit of stickler for not closing until after I get my interest. Because if I bring the whole month, it may only be $40-50. Sorry, you have my money that long, I want my $40-50. So I've kind of been pushing her to, we'll do it at the beginning of the month, let's do all that we can. That way I just get my $40-50 in interest, then put it into if we close it, what I did. So they've held it all that time. 28, 27 days, whatever,
Right.
they keep the interest, we get nothing.
So is the interest kind of prorated for the monies that are in there?
It will, we
Okay.
just started.
Because you're coming in.
Moved it in, I'll have a
Yeah.
spreadsheet for relative value of each of the other funds coming in, and as the interest is posted, the interest will be allocated based on the relative value of those particular funds hold. To the different account. And that way, the answers will be made,
When we get to agenda item 6 and we discuss the policy some more, I want to come back to the bank account issue, because you just raised something I'm not sure I'm quite clear on, and could cause a drafting issue with this, which I don't think I fully understood when we drafted this. The board had really wanted a new account set up. So,
And they're not gonna get one.
bank account.
Then I
And
think
that, well, okay, I wanna talk that through, sort it out, make sure I completely understand it. And then I can go back to them and talk about it, or we can, about whatever, whether it's me or anybody else. But that strikes me as a material issue then. If that prevents us from using STIP in some way, that's a problem, because why would we waste
Right.
throw away the interest, right? So that I wanna come back to, but that's 6 and we're not at 5 yet, so.
And just a follow-up question on that, so who would have check writing ability out of that account?
The town would once the Board of Ed made the request and the Board of Finance signed off.
Okay,
But if it's, I mean, if it is money that is in the statutory 2% non-lapsing ed fund, you know, even though it's in the STIP account, if the school requests it, we have no choice. We have to fork it over. It's not like they just have to ask us for it and we provide it.
This one would be just, they'd have to come to us and ask for, okay, we want to do this project, we consider, and if the two boards agreed, it gets funded. But then once we agree, I believe it's the town that would write the checks. Is that, would you say so, Eric?
The capital.
Yeah,
The cap for the capital.
right,
The new
it's coming out of, it would come out of the town capital account, so it would be.
Yeah, just the way to explain it from that perspective is, it's not really the bank account that is establishing the, you know, the purpose. It's the fund. And so the extent you have a fund in the accounting system, where the cash is, doesn't really matter. As long as you're accounting for all the activity within that fund.
Okay, and this is the sort of thing that I think we may have to talk to the board about.
When you get into bank accounts, it's more of who has the authority to, if there's a change in terms of who has the authority to sign on the account, draw money on the account, that's when a bank account becomes a little bit more important.
Okay, all right, got it.
Correct. But currently, all 28 of the bank accounts on the town side have the same signers, same authority across the board, so there's no difference in that.
As drafted right now, the policy says that, you know, on the BOE's request, BOF should act on it, and if approved, the town finance department will make the requested expenditures. So this is set up to be the town's authority to make the check, write the checks. So, yeah, we'll talk about it some more in a minute, but that's a particular issue that might cause a problem with this particular document, because if I don't want to do something where we're just throwing away interest, that's dumb. But I know the Board of Ed was, for reasons I'm not sure I can particularly articulate, really wanted a new bank account set up. So I may have to go back to them on that.
It's the push and pull.
We'll get there. I want to get to
We wanna
yes.
like trying to. we wanna
Sure,
smooth
but
that.
I also don't want to do something dumb
Yeah.
that costs us, and if we have hundreds of thousands of dollars in some account,
Right,
and we're earning 0.01% interest instead of 5%, that's just stupid.
right.
So we'll work on that.
I just have a timeline question, just while you're here, just, is there a reason? I feel like this is gonna push our financial, and I don't have the knowledge to know, but by making the decisions on moving the surplus into said account or starting the process of asking us, it seems like, is August 31st reasonable for that? I mean, we can't make a decision by, I'm gonna ask this later too, but since it's July 31st, I mean, working in schools, I know that in Cheryl too, I know bills have to go through and get processed and everything, but really all the money has to be encumbered and everything in June, I would think, you know, so you know what's gonna be spent. The only difference is gonna be if maybe the invoices came a little higher or, you know, a couple unaccounted for things, so we're gonna have a good idea in July, I would think. So I'm just thinking, why is the time, it would just help the town, I think, to know how much they wanna put in the accounts, kind of move our financial process a little quicker. So I don't know if August, you know.
Right, August 31st is.
This is relevant to the agreement about the school capital
Yes.
fund. So what it says in there is that the Board of Ed would notify us by August 31st of the amount that they have extra that they wanted to move into the capital fund account. And I think what Joanne's
I'm
getting
hoping
at
it's
is that too late in the process, or is it gonna cause us undue
That's tough.
I'm not,
problems closing the books?
because I won't have to look to 2021. I have no idea whether understood.
So you like the August 31st?
Yeah, I think, how are we?
That's all I wanna know with your expert.
Money, we know what they have, not, when they spend, what have they spent out of budget.
Yeah, we gotta kind of close their books first.
I just remember the town I worked with.
I had
that we had to have everything in, and
Yeah.
so I understand it's different. I just want to ask the question.
I think my first draft said July 31st, Joanne, was
That's-
basically
yeah.
kicked it back to August 31st to give time to
To
reconcile.
process and, yeah,
You've gotta be.
I mean, I-
confident.
What's
You've
the
gotta be confident.
deadline on the 2% on lapsing account?
and that's, yeah.
Is it?
No deadline.
There's
No.
no deadline on
Okay.
either of them, really. And the problem, there's several problems. One is that, you know, we tried to establish a procedure for closing out both the town side and the school side.
Mhm.
And the school basically said flat out, your policy doesn't apply to us, pound sand. So we haven't adopted a policy for either side. However, you know, we've made a hard deadline of what, August 15th?
The town.
You know, on the town side, that, you know, all bills are in and paid for the previous fiscal year by August 15th, so we can start closing the books. The school is not doing that. I mean, there's, you know, I was countersigning checks for them, you know, throughout the month of October,
Wow.
maybe even into November on last fiscal year. So the question, and it's a valid one, is how do you, you know, if they're gonna come to us and say, or come to you as a board and say, we have X number of dollars left, you know, when they've provided you zero financial information in an entire year, how do you agree to that? I mean, that's part of the reason why we've been pushing to get financial information, is that how do we know what's there? I mean, they can ask you to put $200,000 into an account, but do they have $200,000 to put in the account? And how do you even know and when? And
Not the deadlines that had to, okay, thank you, yeah, I'm learning.
yeah, there should be deadlines.
Okay,
I mean,
I didn't know it was October
We may be moving
or
towards.
June 30th.
Let's
October,
move.
sorry, he was here. you know,
No,
and I
yeah,
had-
I mean, August 30th,
And
the end of August is the reporting deadline for the Board of Education and the State Department of Education.
Thank you,
That
I mean,
makes
I know that where I was,
I think
there
that's
was
what
like
they did that.
Yeah.
things we had to do when we didn't have
At
them
the
in.
school level, you're gonna have to get it as soon as they close out the books, and then they'll give the number to us, I guess, so,
Yeah.
okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's.
So
So, yeah, my original date was a little aggressive because I had it in July, but.
Right, and then typically authorizations will be made subject to audit, so, you know, again, the school district, you should be able to rely on the information that they're providing you. And saying that this is our surplus for the year, obviously during the course of the audit process, we may identify adjustments. And so at that point in time, you would retroactively correct any authorizations related to any of those approvals.
Other questions?
Mike, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Again, let's talk about the rest of it.
I will always say, you know, consult with your attorney.
Absolutely. Actually, you reading this, maybe I'm wrong about the account issue. Anyway, we'll get to it.
Okay, so moving on, we will go on to agenda item 5, which is old business. 5A is review budget actual. We do have our report in front of us. Does anybody have any specific questions for Eric or Carol? Please, Sarah.
Just a general question, because I go through this and my instructor glaze over, are there any areas that you can see that we've got issues popping up?
Nothing significant. Are there some areas where we know we're gonna be over? Yeah, like for instance, I know we're gonna be over in our animal control line item because after we passed our budget, they determined what their final, final rate was. So there's a bunch of little things, but nothing material that's really gonna affect us. I mean, the big material things are still unknowns, and that's how bad a snow year it is. Because that's we've already basically shot the building maintenance budget for public works.
You're over on diesel already.
We are and we're not. So I'll explain that. So. And this is something we've struggled to come up with a better system to do. What happens is we fill our diesel tanks up. We put 4,000 or 5,000 gallons in it. They charge us a lot of money, right? So. By the time we've done that twice, we've exceeded our budget. But remember, we are turning around and we are billing ADS and we're billing RAM and we're billing senior transportation and we're billing the fire department.
So that'll get reversed out specifically against that account.
Right,
Okay.
so we're not. but it always looks bad partway through the year. So that's that.
Okay,
If I may ask, from the beginning, looking at the budget, all letters in over, is that correct?
Mhm.
I know it's probably still not quite big enough, I did shut off percentage of the difference. In the two columns instead of four, and the hope that it might be a little bigger. It's going to be difficult for me to make it much bigger. Just because.
you guys think in terms of format?
There's so many accounts that are 5 pages. The only thing I should do periodically, if you choose, if you notice, like where it says tab, page 1, departments, town administration. I can collapse all of those accounts from 102.13 to 102.560 into one line. So you would at least know whether the department as a whole is under our homework. And I could do that, you know, in the beginning of the budget year, because we haven't spent a great deal of funds, obviously, you know, in 4 months or a while. That might shorten up the report a little bit, allow me to make it a little bigger. I'm open to suggestions, it's difficult for me to make it any.
I look online, Cheryl, anyways, you know what I mean, before our meetings, so we're able to make it bigger there. It's just more in person and it's, you know,
I'm fine with
to be
it.
determined if we,
Right, I mean,
because I like to see all.
this
the
gives you
lines.
the more granular.
Yeah, I like to see it.
The number of pages is what bothers me. It's the, you know, the font is like, you know, 8 font.
It's just- I know, it's ridiculous.
But
I think it's the format. It is now.
it's fine. It's the best we do.
That's an Excel file for anyone who might like to go to the Excel.
That would not be a bad thing. I'd like to see.
Yeah, maybe it's.
Sure.
If you will, so we send it over to Kate, for December, I'll send a PDF and of course, my Excel spreadsheet,
Mhm,
looking forward for.
Great.
that works.
Yeah.
Well, just for now, we're interested, you know, this will be 18,000.
How's that?
Where's that, what line is that?
Or roughly 17,000. And if we continue on.
Oh, it's the last one under income. Nice. Nice.
Thousand a year.
Nice.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, you said maybe 70,000.
You fluctuate better.
Mhm.
Last month, I think it was 5.67% was our interest that we received every month.
Right, yep.
If any upside, if interest rates going up, I guess that's it.
Right, it's the town cleans up. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say, and it's not a huge effect, but we are gonna be a little over on a bunch of line items. Because we have a bunch of people that currently their salary is at minimum wage. And the state has indexed that. So the $15 an hour goes up to like $15.41 on January 1st. So, and we did not account for that. One of the things that's gonna be a little bit of a difficulty is that, how do we account for that? Because they don't decide that number till September, which is long after. So we're gonna have to bake in some sort of flex into those.
Based on the cost of living.
Yeah, it's based on.
I assume it's like,
You built in 5%.
it's like
7%
CPI,
every year.
like social security, you know, the.
If you overprice it slightly, it's immaterial.
Right,
Whatever.
and we're not talking big dollars. I mean, we're talking 40 cents an hour
Yeah.
times.
Better to over budget by $200 than under.
Right, right.
And not have to worry about doing transfers.
We'll have to bake in some sort of guesstimate as to the inflation adjustment. Yeah. We can do that.
Right.
Yeah. It's just something to keep in mind that when we go through in January, we start working on this.
Yeah.
Yep. And we also did not anticipate, having to use pest control. So for the year, that's gonna be about $1,500 over. I think there's enough flex in the existing budget for the transfer station to accommodate that. So it does not look like it's gonna bust the overall budget, but there will be some, increase for that. The other thing we are going to go over in is we did change porta potty services for our ball field and transfer station and museum, because the one we were using was just horrendous. So that's about, 40% more expensive than what we were paying. But in the overall scheme of the budget, we're talking about like in the neighborhood of $1,200 a year total. So nothing, there are gonna be some individual things that have gone over quite a bit, but they're not material within the overall budget.
Other questions for Eric and Cheryl on this?
Just done the whole one's done.
On the budget back.
Okay, yeah.
Next item is check register on the agenda. I mean, related on everybody has any.
I just have one question on that, the perma check on here for 23,000. What amount of time does that represent? Like, is that? That's, cause I think I saw it a few times, I did September 25th,
Yeah,
perma 23,000.
Could be our insurance.
right. Remember, we see a separate bill for LAP, which is liability, auto and property, and for workers' comp.
Mhm.
So I don't remember whether they're quarterly or every 6 months, but all total, I think off the top of my head, our perma bill's about $60,000 a year, somewhere.
Okay, yeah, I don't think I had that figure in my head. from any other-
60,000 a year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you, yeah, that stood out, it was, the other ones, I think I understood. That was it, I just wondered how much time that represented, yeah.
Anybody have anything else? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to new business. 6A is review the proposed policy for AEF capital expenditures. This was distributed earlier. I think it's in the packet.
I need a copy today.
Yeah. Too. Yeah.
And so I have copies of
Yes,
the one,
no, it's not in here.
does anybody need copies? This is the
I
one
have that one.
that, Rob and Shannon worked out.
I think I have one.
Okay.
I'm good.
Today.
Need copies? Now, Tina Keller?
Then
All
I
right.
can stay away.
And then I also sent to the board my concerns with that. I sent that to you in an email afterward. And I also asked the town's attorney to weigh in. And so the town, I sent that out, he only gave it to me late last night, so I sent out a copy of that for consideration. So now we got lots of policies to review and consider. Yep.
All right, so I guess let's go ahead and one thing we can do right off the bat is
Did we lose Bill?
I'm here.
Okay.
And I have both copies of those.
Oh, is your screen? Cause why don't we see you?
You don't see me?
No, we don't see you.
I wonder if my video's off. Hold on a minute.
there are several things that
How's that?
There he is.
There we go. Huzzah. And you have copies of the policies? I'd sent them.
I have both.
Okay.
So, some of the concerns that Eric brought up in section 1, that this states that it created a new bank account,
Yeah.
and we've already talked about that. The that's problematic because it creates additional work, it eliminates the ability really for us to use the STIP account and make a return on that investment.
Yeah, so that's what I wanna get at, is I wanna make sure I fully understand that so I can talk to the Board of Ed about that, because I completely agree that it would be a bad result if we put a bunch of money in an account and we earn no interest on it, that's dumb. So, when are we limited to a single STIP account, is that the issue?
Far as I know, yes.
Okay, so if we set up a new bank account by its very nature, it's not a STIP account, because it can't be, because we already have a STIP account. Right?
Right.
So we create a new account, it carves it out of STIP, ergo we don't earn interest. Or that level of interest.
That's one issue. The other issue is that it makes it harder to actually account for. I mean, the simplest way to do it is you have a fund established on the books, and regardless of whether that fund, like we have areas right now where we have a standalone bank account and we have a fund, and they're both the same thing. They're just, we're accounting for them twice, and there's no reason to do that, right? I mean, it's much simpler to just use pooled cash, have a single bank account, and just keep it straight, you know, on the ledger, as opposed to having an individual bank account. You know, back in the day, the town created a bank account every time it wanted to fund something. And so we have this enormous legacy of bank accounts that we pay for every month. And there's no reason to get nothing out of them, other than more aggravation and more time trying to reconcile.
And we asked the other side, Rob, do you know why because this stuck out with me, like, I understand that this is usually how they like to do it, I understand. And I'm wondering if it's still coming from the just wanting to make sure they control it, and that's what I'm
I
hearing and
think that's
seeing.
likely to be, I'm trying to remember the exact
Yeah.
explanation, but
So
yeah. I think-
Especially with that being the first thing, you know, so I wanna hear their perspective with, I understand all the reasons it's much better.
I think they need to come up with a very, very strong reason, it's a separate bank account, you know, given what I've heard, I don't want to hear one, so.
I should understand.
Yeah,
the
I
question,
think once they
the question I
understand.
have for Rob would be, are they also looking to have the ability to, like right now, Eric, you write all checks that pay the bills in the town, right?
Correct.
And so by establishing a separate account, are they asking for that ability to write their own checks for their things? Is that what they're asking for?
No, because the policy later stipulates that the town finance department will write the checks.
That's what I was thinking. When I read that, I was thinking, so why do they want a separate account? They're not gaining anything by having a separate account.
I'll go back to them on that. That's a valid point, and I personally didn't fully understand or think about the way the STIP account was gonna limit us in that way. If we could have multiple STIP accounts, this wouldn't be an issue. It'd be annoying, but it wouldn't be as big an issue.
Yeah.
Right.
They
In that regard, it would still be a reasonable
probably didn't
objection to
think
make,
about
but
it.
it wouldn't be that big a deal if we had to get to yes. Here, if we're literally in a situation where, by the way this is drafted, we're losing out on that kind of interest. That's what's saying, look, we have to revise. So, right there, I'll go back to them.
Okay,
So even if there was an ability to have separate STIP accounts, they still wouldn't have the authorization to write checks out of it.
That's right. I mean, according to this policy, the way it's supposed to work is that both boards agree, and once both boards agree, the town's authorized to write the checks.
Right. So there's just absolutely no reason to have a separate account.
Right,
I
and we are collapsing the rest of, we are not going to have, we will probably end up with one separate bank account. Possibly that all the Norton funds, under their control flow through. But if we can get them to agree with that, we will use pooled cash for them too, for the same reason. You know, why should they be sitting there making 0.1% interest if we can use pooled cash, put the money in the STIP account allocate it and make them 5% interest. It makes bad economic sense.
Right, I completely agree with that, and I'll go back to them on that point, that's totally fair, and, apologies for the oversight, I probably should have picked up on
No,
that,
it's easy.
you know.
Oh, but it's good
Easy
to
to
have.
think.
We
Okay.
needed to discuss.
Yeah, I think it's part of the process. This is
Yeah.
Good progress.
Yeah.
Okay. So Eric, you also raised an issue that says this eliminates the requirement that capital expenses comply with the Board of Finance purchasing policy. I'm not sure how that's addressed in section 1. But I don't know that it is. This lives alongside of it potentially. They need to agree. I do agree with you there.
So there's kind of two conflicting things. One, in general, the Board of Ed is exempted from the purchasing policy by charter. However, what we're talking about are capital expenses that will be spent primarily maintaining buildings and assets that are technically town assets.
Right.
So from my perspective, and I believe the auditor's perspective, that should fall under our capital policies, which include the purchasing policy. I don't think exempting them from that makes
How does
sense.
this exempt them from that? Where am I, did I miss something there?
So it took out the language that was in the original one, requiring them to, so they removed the language that was in the original, the first draft, stating that they had to comply with that policy.
I think the concern was, in general, the concern was that section 807 of the town charter carves them out of a lot of stuff. Certainly carves them out of like the normal CIP review process. It specifically states that all town departments, with the exception of the Board of Ed, shall do the following. So we were trying to remain compliant with that. I think they will still, and we'll get to this, but I think they'll still submit to CIP. It's just non-binding in the way that it wouldn't necessarily be, for another department. And similarly with the purchasing policy, I think they should have their own that mimics ours, but they wanted to, I think, retain control of that. So that's why it came up.
I feel like we've already had discussions too, Rob, which you alluded to, that they are willing, if there are big capital things that are gonna happen, go through a process. I thought that's
told
what
them
we,
repeatedly, I
Yeah.
said to Shannon repeatedly, you guys really need to have a capital plan. Regardless of any of this, you need to have a capital plan.
well, that
Like-
only benefits them.
Like any
Not
department
ideas, yeah.
or board or commission in town, the fire commission has their 10-year capital plan, they know which fire trucks are aging, et cetera. They know that.
Sorry,
What?
the other committee started to interrupt the fire
Fire
department.
department, yes. So the fire department separately gives us a 10-year plan that is reviewed by CIP annually. Most of the remaining capital plans get generated by the town.
Yeah.
Like there's one for public works equipment, there's one for building, there's one for all the major capital funds that are established.
Should we do that for the school?
Right, the school should definitely do that.
And it's
Instead
a
of saying-
The issue is, how much gets baked into this particular policy? And, I'm trying to get to yes, I'm trying to get to a workable policy,
Yeah,
and they wanted to retain some, more control, so, that will go. I do think, again, I think best practice would absolutely be that they sit down and hammer out a 10-year capital plan. And, whether they wanna, have it blessed by CIP or not, because they're carved out of the normal CIP process by town charter. But they, in my perfect world, they would create it and then stick it in front of us, yeah. It would be good, and then.
I don't even think my mind was going there, but thank you for saying that part. I just meant the process later, like. Hopefully they'll do that. I think that would benefit them to have a plan and then
Yeah.
prioritize where they wanna put them.
Absolutely.
So if they want to, fine, if not, they can plan or, come up with an idea as they come up with, but I meant even the processes afterwards, like. So would that eliminate them from having to go to CIP?
So the way this
Or
is.
should I wait until?
The way this is structured is that they basically, it says that they may go through CIP. And the way it works is this, since the town charter specifically carves them out.
Yeah.
Of the normal CIP process. Then the idea was,
Regardless.
honestly, you should still go through CIP, but. The difference is that CIP, whether it recommends it or not. The Board of Finance will still consider it.
Mhm.
In other words, they don't get stopped at CIP if CIP raises an issue. It's a non-binding recommendation. Whereas I think for a town department, if CIP is like, this is a terrible idea, it stops there and they go back and they revise. But because 807 of the town charter says what it says, that would probably be an overreach. So we came up with this sort of compromisey thing where they may submit to CIP and CIP will review it, and regardless of that, Board of Finance will consider it.
But
And we can still, when we consider it, take into consideration CIP's review. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
like
you
we have to
explained it.
pretend that that didn't happen.
Mhm.
But it just means that if they want something badly enough, it is ultimately their money. So they still have the right to come to us and make their case.
it's not, hold on, stop. It is not their money. It is the town's money. It is a capital fund, like every other capital fund that the town has, just like the fire department has a capital fund. But they don't control that fund. The town, through the budget process, controls that fund. So let's be clear, it's just a capital fund that happens to say AES on it. And the other thing we're missing with this is that the Board of Selectmen is not giving up its authority to manage how its buildings are, capital improvements to its buildings. So keep in mind that they still don't own the buildings and they still can't willy-nilly decide to do something to the buildings without the Board of Selectmen. They may disagree with that, but if they wanna pull permits, the property owner has to agree to pulling the permits.
I see this as them. Because of the history, just trying to protect, I don't think when he says, oh, it's their money, I think they do realize that, having sat at the table. I think they're just afraid that they're just trying to be protective and they're trying to put some trust out there. I think that they realize, and I hope I'm just giving my opinion. I understand that this is a lot for them and they're just trying to protect the money. And like the town, it is the town's money, and if some big disaster happened, something would have to happen, but, yeah.
They can always have a representative go to the CIP.
They have a representative.
Well, Shannon.
Yeah.
Is
Or it
she
doesn't
there
have to be,
Is she there for the school education?
yeah, the
Oh,
Board of
she
Ed
is,
has,
okay.
just like I'm there for Board of Ed.
All right.
So they have them. So can you? Give me a scenario. When you say, alright, the buildings aren't theirs, they're the town's. So the Board of Selectmen reserves its rights to get involved.
Sure.
This policy obviously doesn't mention the Board of Selectmen. So what's the scenario you're envisioning here? Where we could run afoul, like, on the one hand, I wanna get to a policy that is workable, we can actually put into place and get used to using. On the other hand, I don't wanna step on a limb, so can you walk me through what you're thinking about here?
Sure. So let's say, for instance, we knew based on the school's capital plan that they were anticipating spending a buttload of money on a boiler replacement, in 2 years. And then the Board of Ed decided in the meantime, they wanted to spend what was in the capital for something that was of lesser importance, potentially. And I would think, as the building owner, the Board of Selectmen would probably say, hey, we really need to pack away every dime we can, because this is the bigger issue that we have. And if we spend this money that's in the capital fund now, we are going to have to go back to the taxpayers to do the boilers in 2 years or the roof. So that I could see that scenario coming up. Very easily, you put $150,000 in the account. And then you spend it, for instance, on a parking lot, when you have a major structural issue, or you have a major issue with the septic system, or something like that. That is a scenario I could totally see the Board of Selectmen, stepping in.
And they would step in by refusing a permit? How would they do that specifically?
Yes. I mean, I don't think they'd want to be in a position of going after Board of Ed legally. I mean, that would be ugly. But, unless the board gives the authority to them to do that, that's part of the reason why this whole thing came up, is that the Board of Ed does not really have the right to do their own capital projects. Part of the way I tried to draft the first policy of that was to say, and I am not trying to put more work on myself. I am perfectly fine with the school managing their own capital projects, as long as they announce ahead of time what they're doing. And they follow a purchasing policy, so they've gone through a formal process if it's an expensive item. And they go through the steps and we know they're gonna get a good product. Does that answer your question? I know I was kind of wandering.
Didn't we say that any capital expenditures, it is worked out between both entities? It's not just for the Board of Ed, because we own that property. It's supposed to be a cooperative between both boards. That's what we've always said, right?
Now talking about the third
Oh, the Board
board.
of
So this is Board of Finance, Board of Ed. The policy that we've drafted is Board of Finance and Board of Ed.
So
Right? Those are the two boards that are referenced here. Board of Selectmen is what Eric's bringing up. So you get the third. And there has been, right now, as everybody knows,
Yep.
significant friction there. So I'm trying to get at what the pitfalls are. And if if we put this into place as drafted, just as an example, and Board of Selectmen, for whatever reason, doesn't like a proposal, what's the failure point? What are they, are they gonna step in? They're gonna step in and they're gonna do what specifically? And this is where I'm getting at the permitting issue, because the permitting for the parking lot was a problem. I'm trying to get at what the deficiencies are, because I know that, if we're trying to come to an agreement between the boards on how we can operate better, how we can collaborate better. And the idea behind this policy was, frankly, that if it was between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, there was a certain amount of trust, and that we could get this done. If we put in here that Board of Selectmen has the final say on something, I don't know that we're gonna get to yes. And that was, the reason why some of the language was deleted. So now I wanna figure out, okay, if we put this into place, is it all an exercise of futility if and when the Board of Selectmen has an issue? Because this can say whatever it wants to say, and if that happens,
I think the gist of it is, as the auditor confirmed, right?
Mhm.
This fund is under control of the town.
Yep,
The expenditure is under the management of the town, it's controlled by, so Eric's gonna be the one signing the checks.
Yep.
Eric works most directly to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen don't want a project, they don't want Eric to sign the check, he's not gonna sign the check. I think that's how it stops.
Right, and I'm not gonna sign a contract if they tell me not to sign a contract. I mean, I'm not crazy.
But I think we all sat at that table together. I know you weren't there, and we all, and I hope that they were there too, the Board of Ed. All of our boards spoke to, that we want this for the benefit of the Board of Education. You know, that
Yeah.
everyone wants the best. I understand the history. I think this whole thought, Rob, this could help by even introducing this account and having this account, you know, was a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's
Trying
a
to-
forward, but I think legally though,
Right, right, if something comes up and they can't, like, say it is an idea that maybe there's gonna be way more pressing, you know, things that are gonna happen as Eric represented. And then they wanted to get something else, I would hope everyone could come together and have a meeting about it, and it wouldn't. I don't mind this being said, like, you would not want it to be like a permit just gets stopped, you would hope there'd be some discussion, some meetings, not a refusal of
yeah,
a
I
permit, you
don't
know?
even know that the permit really is so much the issue.
No, I-
as the
It was
management.
mentioned.
No, but I get it, because,
But, okay, so the way this policy is drafted, okay, it says, the Board of Ed and Board of Finance agree, the town issues the check. So, I mean, it's in one of the final sections here, it's in, yeah, C, it's in 4C. Following step is review, if any, BOE's request, BOF shall act upon BOE's request and may authorize the town finance department to make the requested expenditure. So if we authorize,
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it will get done. So we're just a gatekeeper. We are not the management of the town, right? Am I-
Right, is, so I guess that's kind of the,
well, that's the nut of it.
is you control the finances, right? There's no question about that. You can set up the funds, you can authorize an expenditure from the fund. But at the end of the day, the Board of Selectmen has to agree to a project. If it's a capital project, if it's a maintenance project, no. You know, and the other thing I have to be a little careful of is there's a series of statutes that say who can pull permits. And the fact of the matter is, a contractor can only pull a permit, you know, with the express permission of the building owner. And the building owner really is the town of Andover. And so, I mean, that is why I went to the Board of Selectmen with that in the first place, you know, regarding the parking lots.
Just from a management perspective, I mean, if Jay wants a new front end load, you know, or the fire department wants to do, well, fire department's not a good example, Jay wants a new front end load. And Eric agrees, and they come through CIP and they agree, and CIP comes to us, or then it goes to us, and we all agree. That doesn't mean that Board of Selectmen is gonna sign that check. Right? And so this is no different. This is just another project, as you know, you say, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's gonna go. You still need for an expenditure like that, you would still need to go through the Board of Selectmen.
Correct, I don't make any decisions on capital projects without their blessing.
So this just kind of falls, it's just like, it's just part of that process.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying, Bob, that that's gonna be a point of contention, but I think realistically, given the legal structure of the town and the authorities of the various boards, I don't see any way around the Board of Selectmen potentially
right.
having the possibility, but I agree with Joanne, you think, you know, the whole point of this fund is to have this for, you know, a reasonable capital improvements to the AES district, and that everybody would act in that best behalf there. So to me, it makes, I don't know how much of an issue it's gonna be for the Board of Ed, but I don't think we can get around it, I'm just like, you know.
Have they seen this yet? They've seen this,
They
right?
signed it.
They signed.
No,
it.
not this,
No, no,
Oh,
the other one.
we're talking about
No, they
Right.
said
the one that we're probably gonna go back and redraft that because of the bank accounts. They actually approved and signed the draft that Shannon and I went down. I didn't know they were gonna sign it in advance. I would have gone to that meeting if I knew they were
I
actually.
don't think the language in this actually says that, you know, boom, done deal. When you get to section 4C, I don't think just because we've we authorize the town finance department to make that expenditure.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's automatically gonna happen.
From my discussions, I think that's what they think it means,
Thank you.
which is
I think
an
that,
important
yeah,
point.
Gonna make.
The last thing I want is we all say, yeah, you can buy out,
Yeah.
we signed this thing,
And then
and
they
then
don't know
it seems like it's been
Yeah.
underhanded. I don't want them to be,
No, I
You know.
agree, yeah, I think we agree.
you know, that would be actually the worst possible result. Is
Right.
that we sign this and everybody's happy, and then it comes out that, well, no, it doesn't mean what you think it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to be continued.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with 4C, I just don't think that it's the whole story.
Well, and that's just it,
You know,
what
you
is
have
it saying?
clause that says,
It's
you
just
know, all capital expenditures may be under the review of the board of selectmen as well, and it makes it clear.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and Eric's original draft had language about the board of selectmen, and it came out.
Right.
Which is why, and it was like the first change that Shannon wanted, so this is the issue.
Right,
The issue is, they wanted this to be between our
Absolutely.
two boards.
They've said,
And what we're explaining is that's not actually,
And we're not the
Possible.
executive, we're not the executive.
which in turn means that this may not apply at all, but I will have to have further
but
discussion.
this is why we have these discussions,
Right.
why we have to learn about it and
I
see,
mean,
yeah.
I'm not gonna sign it, we're gonna put a policy together that's meaningless,
right, and
We
that,
appreciate you representing, yeah.
no
doing all
problem,
of
but,
that.
you know.
yeah,
But we have to get it right and we have,
We
but I
absolutely-
hope that you can at least say that the whole point, like I said, you know, just repeating, was to establish something for them. So we don't wanna, I hope that they don't wanna just keep, you know, I hope that they can take a little bit of trust on their end, it's gonna take a lot. And just let's see how some things go, you know, and hope that
so.
what we said that meeting will come to fruition.
You know, that's the hope.
And there are some classes of things that don't fall in that category. And if you read what the attorney wrote in that second one I put, because I gave him the original policy and then the policy you drafted. And then he redrafted this one. Because there's a difference between, like, for instance, the school could purchase vehicles. They could decide they needed a new Bobcat. They could decide they needed a new mower. That would not be, the Board of Selectmen would not have any say in that. Because that's not real property. That's not building land, road, parking areas, such as that. Where the board's statutory authority comes in is as the property owner, which is why that sentence was added, you know, to basically say, you know, if they bring you a request for a new $30,000 mower, that's on you. The Board of Selectmen really doesn't have any say in that. If it involves the building, they do, and if it involves a parking area, they do.
Real.
If that makes sense.
So,
It does.
it's possible to, so I'm trying to think of a way, potential compromise solutions to this issue. And so the policy that Shannon and I drafted, we could break out building and related and non-building related, just like you just said, because to me, a $30,000 mower is a capital expenditure. It's just not affecting the building that the town owns, and therefore, what you're saying is.
Right.
Okay,
Right, and
okay,
you understand what, I mean, I wanna make it clear that the Board of Selectmen's authority is only on real property which technically they control. They don't have control over whether you buy, you know, I mean, they could decide to go out and buy a Ford F-550 quad cab dually for the superintendent if they wanted. And if you guys agreed, they probably could buy that, and that would have nothing to do with the Board of Selectmen. But if they wanna do something to the building, then that is ultimately where their authority overlaps.
Most businesses and organizations consider that a capital purchase also.
no, it is absolutely a capital purchase, fine.
Would a lot of this not be alleviated by just putting in a full capital non-recurring budget every single year like everybody else does?
You're talking about your capital budget?
That we are going to need a mower in 3 years. So based on, and the mower's gonna be 30,000, we want to put $10,000 in for the next 3 years. You're going to need a truck.
We're starting babies.
Are you
That's
talking about
Yeah.
putting it under the school's control or under the town's control?
I'm telling you.
That's what this is.
Well,
Now we have.
It's a baby step.
Culverts, we
Yeah.
have all of these. You're saying, you're going to take money, if I understand correctly, either fund capital, AES capital projects, through the budgetary process, or take funds from unspent education funds
Yep.
and allocate it.
Yep.
You're just allocating the money, you're not allocating the specific projects. So
No, but there's no,
right, but that is,
then everyone would know that we're making money for a tractor, we're making money for computers, we're making money, they mentioned this, we're getting monies ready for these items, and we're spreading out the pain to citizens over multiple potential budget periods. How we fund it is immaterial, it's how we're spending the money that it seems that everyone is hung up on.
yep,
The select you can say, the board of finance you can say, who gets to say? But if we don't have any destination on what the funds are really gonna be spent on, it's like, here's money, go ahead and spend it. I think if we could finalize, you're going to put in the budget, just like everybody else. You want it, and tell citizens, this is what we think we're going to be spending. Understand, you put a budget in for 30,000 for a tractor. And then they come to the board of finance and say, you know what, the truck blew up.
right.
Can we take the money from the tractor? And I can easily set up another CIP saying, money's transferred from the tractor to the truck. It's all open, it's all there.
but Cheryl, I understand what you're saying. It's basically, we need a plan and communicate that plan and you fund that plan.
That's correct.
Right, so the problem we have right now in this town is the issue of control.
Yeah,
The Board of,
as you
the
know,
Board of Education is not comfortable with the fact that the Board of Selectmen and or the Board of Finance might have some.
But if it goes to the no budgetary
that's
process,
just why
it
that,
automatically goes to them. Think about it.
Yeah.
We do trees, we
that's just it.
culverts. If I record that in those specific funds, when a bill comes in to the treasurer's office, if it's for trees, it has to be designated as. If for bridge and culvert, it has to be bridge and culvert. It's going to be, a public works, it's within what they said they're going to spend the money on. So if the school said we're going to anticipate this, and this, $100,000, and they spread it out, let's say over 2 projects, 4 projects, however it is. And it goes in the normal budget process, we're getting ready for budget season, put it in for budget process. We're going to fund it through that process.
yeah,
Since we're also heading into budget, if we could ever find out how much they plan to give back to the town, we would have that. Some of those funds available to reduce the necessity of an increase in fund, taking.
well, that's why we want to roll it into this capital
What are
thing.
the budgets, the money comes in after, either we take it from their unspent funds, or we tax the citizens for it. But what are they spending on? Maybe if we can get everybody to do this is what they're spending it on. Then potentially their fear of control or their fear of losing the ability to spend it on what they're. Citizens said you can buy a truck, citizens said you can buy a truck. That's what it said, the citizens agreed to that.
That's what Rand.
Yeah, I think
You're
that's
talking about
fair.
what Rand does, and we haven't done it that way in the past, and I think we're inching towards something like that, maybe, if we can make this work.
It's gonna
This is
add
interim, this is kind of
This is
the,
kind of an interim step, but I think,
can we make this work? And so it is, I understand your point.
100%.
But
yeah.
this is an attempt to move us in a better direction from where we are now, which is none of that is happening, right? So it's, it is by its nature kind of fraught and compromising. So no, I understand what you're saying. There is, in a perfect world, there a lot of the stuff that you just talked about would be in place already or would be our normal operating procedure. That's not where we are. And we're trying to get closer to that. That's the best way I can
A
explain
great
it.
idea in the future, you
Yeah,
know,
I
it'll
agree.
be transparent.
Yeah,
But-
would I like to see that 10 years from now, the way, you know, maybe, yeah, but
And it
let's
will
see if we can
be a
make this
lot of
work.
requests for tracks, so
Yeah, we
it's
really
explicit,
are,
right?
and I don't wanna kick off another round of that, so. I mean, I've taken a bunch of notes on the discussion we just had, so that I think I can articulate them back to Shannon and the rest of the board, you know, Shannon and the rest of them, and Jerry, and so forth. And certainly on the bank account issue, I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't think anybody would say, oh, well, too bad, leave 5% interest on the table. We'll talk about that one. The other issue strikes me as much more material, really much more of a problem, potentially. Maybe I'm wrong, but, you know,
The
we'll
other
have
issue being
to,
the Board of
I'll have to
Selectmen.
ask them to watch our meeting. So they can see for themselves, but my encapsulation of it is basically this. The Board of Selectmen being the executive body of the town being the owner of the building, the structure itself. Means that there's no way around, you cannot actually carve Board of Selectmen out of a project on that building. Therefore, regardless of what our lovely little policy draft says, they're gonna be involved. Whereas, on the other hand, a capital expense that is not related to the building, is not a part of the building, something like a mower, just as an example, that the town does not own as a structure, then that is something they really can just kind of do on their own with our approval. So it strikes me as if we're going to get to yes, that we're gonna have to break those out into separate categories and make that clear. So that nobody is blindsided when they go to do something and Board of Selectmen steps in and says, but wait, you know, we don't think you've accounted for this properly or whatever, like the drainage under the parking lot, or what have you. And then the process grinds to a halt again and everybody's upset. You know, you told us this was the way it's gonna be. The last thing I wanna do is sell this to somebody and then have them come back and say, you misrepresented what we were doing.
Much better have it completely 100% clear.
So, I think I've got that. Is there anything else in that policy?
Yeah, section 4D, I think, is a non-starter. It's just, as Eric pointed out, it's not legal. I think it doesn't fit into legal definitions of what the board. The money is the accounts. It's in the town accounts. I think that the Board of Finance can decide to transfer those funds without the Board of Education's approval. Would we do that? No, we wouldn't. You know, maybe you make it advisory, but legally it probably wouldn't stand.
I think the 2%, they actually.
The 2%.
2% is totally different.
That's different.
Right, we could not tap the 2%
Yeah.
legally.
Right.
Well, they have
As
to
far
go
as I know.
So
This,
the issue, I mean, if we say, okay, we're not gonna do that, right? But we're gonna stipulate that you can't, but in the policy, we're not gonna do that. So the issue for you is that because our, you know, the way our role is defined. Is that we have the power to move that, even though we'll say, well, we won't, without your say so. I mean, is there a way we can?
What you could say is the Board of Finance will only transfer funds or authorize expenditure of the funds with consultation of the Board of Education, by consultation, but I don't know Board of Ed. It's the Board of Ed, we're talking about on
Gotcha.
4D, because they're saying you can't move it without our approval. Well, the reality is, you know,
I think we talked about the history of being
Yeah.
transfers too, right? There hasn't been a lot of those.
no, but I think it's just this trust.
Right,
I
it's
agree.
it's
I
just
know.
pointed out at our joint meeting, you know,
Yeah.
we do have expansive power to move money. When we discovered the problem with the town aid road, not town aid, but the town road. You know, we plugged over $100,000 hole. We made the decision, we moved the money.
Right, but we were also given the history that.
Of course,
you
I'm
know.
not saying we did something
Right.
willy-nilly or dumb.
Right,
But what I'm saying is, we, without any commitment not to do that, technically.
Yeah.
We could in fact dip into this fund and plug a hole, and they didn't want
Yeah.
to agree to that.
no, I.
So if we put in this document, if we remove 4D, so now you're saying we could redraft 4D to say something about consultation, but that, here's my problem with that, is I'd like to reduce the ambiguity in this, you know, in this document as much as possible.
Well, the charter basically gives the Board of Finance the power of transferring funds, right?
Right.
So the charter is gonna supersede
Could
this.
we voluntarily choose, I guess this gets to a question that Shannon and I went back and forth with respect to the charters, 807, where they get carved out of the CIP process, and I kept saying, sure, but couldn't you voluntarily agree to enter into the CIP process, even though you technically don't have to?
Right, well, that's what I'm
Well,
saying.
now, the shoes on the other foot, and we're talking about our powers, and could we voluntarily say, but we won't use it here?
Yeah, we could say that, but I don't think we can commit to not ever doing it unless they approve. That's because I think that's superseded by the charter.
Right, so
Okay.
that's a blue sky event, but let me give you a scenario.
Mhm.
Chaplin went through some incredible floods less than 3 months ago. I think they dumped a lot of money from every pool they had into reopening roads because they were washed out. I mean, they bought a bunch of temporary bridges, they did a whole bunch of stuff, and, you know, in that scenario, would I raid this fund with your knowledge? Yep, you bet I would, because I would have no choice.
Disaster scenario.
This particular one.
Just any fun, the disaster scenario, like, oh my god, you have any
It would- it would- No, it would not necessarily be the first fund, but in that case,
You were eating.
I mean, I would raid every fund the town has.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank
He's-
you.
he's saying it's an emergency, all hands on.
I
deck.
know what you're saying,
But
but
this,
he's
this,
not helping
this gets to the
on
nut of it, though, this is exactly the issue.
Exactly,
Is
that's how we
that
got the meeting as well, you're not
and-
there, but
and
we
right.
could have smoothed it over, but we kept doing things like this.
No,
And just.
well, we had to- we had to-
We did, but I'm a town
Well.
person and sitting from the side.
Right.
You know, we didn't all
Yeah.
try to help.
This is exactly the sort of scenario that I
Yes.
think anyone envisions, it's not hard to envision an emergency scenario, okay? You know, and here's the thing, in my perfect world, in a scenario like that, if we were to enact a policy as drafted, let's put aside the charter restriction section. And that happens, you know, could we go to the Board of Ed and say, guys, we're over a barrel here, can we use some of your money? And they would say yes, okay, because it was that much of a disaster. Okay, but this gets back to on all sides, the trust issue, okay?
Exactly.
Right.
We have to trust that in that scenario, they would say yes. Or they have to trust that absent a scenario that dire,
Mhm.
we're not gonna yank their fund money.
Absolutely.
So that 4D is, that's absolute, that's gonna be another big, this is the major issue. And I see your point, Mark, about the charter lays out our board responsibilities and powers. You know, and the question becomes, similar to them agreeing to go, you know, at least agreeing to put things under CIP. You know, they're specifically carved out of CIP. They felt, my original draft said that they shall submit their projects to CIP. This draft says may. The reason they changed the word, they believed that that conflicted directly with Charter Section 807, and they could not agree to shall. Right, so they changed it to may, which introduced ambiguity, which I didn't like, but now we have the exact same issue with 4D, and it's just flipped around.
Mhm.
So we're gonna have to try to find a way to make this workable in the real world, in, you know, given the atmosphere that we have. I'll certainly take this back,
Right.
but I foresee major resistance to, you know, giving up or substantially changing 4D, because again, the fear is that if they hand over money into this fund that they could otherwise have expended, that was the whole idea, right? Then they lose control of it, and then, you know, in the worst case scenario, you know, we or the board of selectmen do things with that money that, you know, they could have kept it under their purview. And like, I'm not saying that all these concerns are 100% reasonable, I'm saying that that's what they are, and they exist. So, yeah.
So I do want to say one thing. We've created this account, we can fund this account. This is just an agreement as to how we'll use it.
Correct.
The only thing that this agreement really does is it generates some agreement between the two boards about how things are gonna be done.
Right.
And gives them a level of comfort
Mhm.
that would lead them to say, okay, hey, yeah, we got 20,000 left over
Yep.
the other thing. So they're comfortable
Yep.
putting that into the account so that they're not gonna lose, we're not gonna do something,
Right, they lose control of
Underhanded.
the money, once it goes through this account, it's no longer completely there.
they're never gonna get 100% confidence. They're never gonna have
Until
control
we
of
let
this.
it go, hopefully
Right.
time will
Well,
do that.
it's gonna be a trust thing, and
There you
in the
go.
same way that, we as the town trust them to spend the lion's share of the money that goes from taxation
Mhm.
properly for our children's education.
Mhm.
They're gonna have to come to a level of trust, I think that the town is not gonna do anything. And if we were to go raid that money because, Jay needed a new front end loader, then we should all be voted out.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand.
We should.
Right.
For a front end loader, yeah. For an act of God is a major plus, that wipes out the half dozen bridges,
If we
we're rating everything.
Right, yeah. If,
No, it's not.
you lose all three culverts
I'm
and
there
whatnot,
too.
yeah, understood, that's a difference.
I mean, that is my nightmare scenario, just so I'm perfectly clear with you. And having spent, a bunch of time in Vermont this summer and watched how many of those towns got.
It wasn't nearly as bad as when I read, but anyway.
I know.
Yeah, certainly that's the thing, but I do think that with this account, they're never gonna have complete control, but the agreement will help. Hopefully generate some
Ease.
understanding that, yeah, we're gonna do the right thing. And it's also a signal that, and I mean that literally to the voters, that, yeah, we've agreed to this, and if we were to renege on it for some reason, then, yeah, we should be voting,
Yeah, so,
or taking the task.
Yeah.
Just to sum it up for what we're gonna.
I'm trying, yeah, but I mean, again, I'm striving for a certain amount of clarity, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wanna make this both workable and clear to everybody involved, so everybody's on the same page, and then we don't, have this blow up in our face. So, here's the thing, we've got 3 issues, all right, are there any more before I stop taking notes?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Does the charter override these policies?
Well, that's what we're
Well,
just
that's what
talking
we're
about.
intertwining.
Yes, we've now had people from, on both boards say, we think the charter supersedes whatever you've drafted. In the Board of Ed context, it was the issue of going through CIP. In the Board of Finance context, it's 4D as drafted says that, we can't transfer funds without BOE approval. Bart's take on that is that conflicts the charter, that's not how our roles and responsibilities are defined, so we can't give that up. What I'm saying is, and I said this on the Board of E, issue 2, is couldn't we voluntarily, for the purposes of this account, give that up? I see that there are,
I agree with,
Okay.
if they want to be part of this fund, they have to
Okay.
comply with like
Alright.
all the other.
I'm not willing to commit to-
Everyone's opinion matters,
Yeah.
right? Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
again, I'm trying to be,
Yeah, I
I'm
hear
trying to moderate this and trying to
Yeah.
get to a, something that everybody can live with.
Sure.
I feel like I'm in
I like the word
mediation, except the other side's in the other room.
But what about,
Uh,
can you provide consultation? We don't.
I will bring it up, this is the reason I typed this all up, I have the consultation in quotes.
I mean, I think we're there.
I mean, I'm working with a lawyer here, remember, and I,
Okay.
and I deal,
No,
and I'm an insurance guy, right, I deal with contracts all the time. The language matters, and the intent has to be clear.
Yeah,
And if you get 2 different parties signing an agreement that have different intents in mind, you've got a recipe for disaster.
You got it. I'm just under, I get the
Those,
point.
I have this technique, we have the 3 issues, the stiff account issue with the bank account idea, the first slide of this. 2, the Board of Selectmen's purview and involvement with respect to any capital improvement that touches on essentially the building. What about grounds, Eric? What would you
He
say?
has a great line, right?
They own the property, so grounds fall into that same.
Building and grounds, okay. Okay, so that's what I wanna be clear. So if it's a piece of equipment, it's over here. If it's building and grounds,
Yeah.
then it's difficult, if not impossible, to limit, the Board of Selectmen's say so on that. And this policy doesn't make that clear, so we have to talk about that some more. And then finally, 4D, is this charter compliant? Can we actually do this? At least multiple members of the Board of Finance don't think we can, and don't wanna do that. So those are our 3 issues. I think I've summarized that reasonably well. I can go back and discuss this further with, liaising with the, Board of Ed. And see if we can. What do you got, Bill?
So I'm not sure if this is maybe both a question and a comment. On the $8,700 in the non-lapsing account, it says at the top that it's to be transferred into the capital fund. Is that correct?
No, it's not in the non-lapsing account, it's in the expansion account, it's the old school account,
Yeah,
so.
we already,
You'd
moved
already
it.
agreed to.
I thought we already approved.
See, that's why I think that should be out of the agreement,
Yeah,
because
that could.
They're
you as a
protecting
board
them.
already decided
I get it, they wanna cover all their bases.
Yeah, well, this all boils, no, all this boils down to, Eric, is the whole, this ties back into the creation of the new account thing. If that's not happening, then there's no need for that line either, because then we've already frankly earmarked, we already moved that money in a sense,
Yeah.
right? The difference
Okay.
between bank account and fund is the issue that I have to talk to them about, because I think it may be, and actually my hope, is that there's a mindset where, because of the way the town used to do things, whenever we did something new, it was a new bank, a separate bank
Yeah.
account, is what I was talking about before. We're now reversing all of that, collapsing our accounts. And maybe it's, get with the times and understand that, and I'll try to explain that, but yes, that's a good point. That language really only makes sense in the scenario where we're creating a new bank account, and we already kind of said, well, we already, I think, 2 meetings ago, we agreed to move that money.
Longer than that.
Yeah, 2, 3 meetings ago, yeah, correct. So this is all about the whole idea of having a separate account, right, as opposed to having a separate fund,
Okay.
if I'm understanding the
Good-
distinction
Good
properly.
point,
Okay, couple other, and they may be minor and they may be major, it's all your decision. But right now, the way the fund, the language that you guys agreed to says an expense in excess of $25,000. That conflicts with your existing policy,
Mhm.
so you should make that as a board consistent. And if you decide $25,000 is an appropriate level, and I have no problem with you deciding that,
Okay, so there'll be a lot of decisions.
then put it in place. And the only thing I would ask is that as we do it, when we define these things, make them universal definitions
Good
and
point.
carry them throughout all your policies so that you're consistent.
And what I had said, when I was working with Shannon, is what I said to her is, we have at least a draft policy, we have a policy where we set a threshold. You guys should have a policy. In my perfect world, it mirrors ours. This was what they came up with. It's a little bit different, I agree. But the idea was, they wanted to have their policies, okay, fine, but define your terms, lay it out. And this is the threshold they picked. If we think it's a real problem to have a different threshold, we're 15, Eric, is that correct? So we're at 15, they're at 25. Okay, maybe we could talk about meeting at 20.
Yeah. Like decisions. Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, making it 25 would not break my heart.
No, I bet.
We're not doing.
But what I'm saying is just make it consistent.
Yeah,
Whatever you
good
choose,
point.
choose it for the same thing.
What else there?
If I can also, they really don't have the right to determine whether it's going to be reported through the normal expenditure process of the CIP, which all CIP is an expenditure process. They reference tax returns and depreciation. Depreciation is a GAAP entry only. It is not a book entry. We do not make depreciation. So if I spend $30,000 on capital assets, show the expenditure within the financial statements that we have. The auditors then, the depreciation schedule for the auditors. There's a supplemental schedule that goes within the financial statements to gross it up or gross it down, whichever it has to be. There really should be nothing in there saying that they're going to determine what class life it is. We already have that within our chart. It already says what the life of an asset has to be. They don't need to decide that 10 deaths together classifies as a capital asset. It does not.
No.
The threshold amount is 25,000.
Right.
15,000 per item. 10% out of the 15. It's not going to be on
No,
the depreciation schedule.
I think there's probably a capital account definition that get copied out of some textbook or some correct page somewhere. That's a good catch, because I was.
Yeah, I was trying to get it defined.
It's like financial statements over multiple years, that really doesn't.
Yeah,
It just needs to come out of there.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't need to put.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen. If
Yeah, I
I
mean,
verify it-
On the balance sheet, it's an investment, that's a corporate thing, that just needs to,
Yeah.
that'll settle statements related to
Right.
how we come out.
Yes,
Capitalizing an asset because you spread the cost over useful life, no, that's
Yeah.
not what this is,
Yeah.
that's not what happens here.
Okay.
yeah,
That's just, I don't think that changes any of this
No.
substance of what we're talking about, but it is important to have that.
yes.
Yeah.
One of them.
Bill, did you have anything else,
Okay.
or did we cover what you were asking about? Was there anything else?
I'm not sure if I understood the $8,700. Maybe I'm just thick here, but I thought it said that the $8,700 was going to be transferred into the capital fund. And that's what my question was, is that going to happen?
we already,
Yeah, we authorized that when we created the capital fund. We authorized the transfer
But
of the remaining.
going forward, that 2%, isn't it supposed to be like we just discussed, when the accountant was there? That's kind of like a contingency fund. It shouldn't be always transferred into that capital fund, right?
Right, well, the way the 2%, transfer goes is if the end of the year, if the school has unexpended funds, they can come to normally those unexpended funds are returned to the town
Right.
by definition. So what they can do is they can come to the town and say, hey, Board of Finance, we have unexpended funds of $50,000. We want to put those into a 2% account, and then we can approve that or not, but that stays under their control. So that's completely separate from this.
that's a different fund, yeah.
That's under the school Board of Finance or Board of Education's control.
I've been looking at it.
So the $8,700 bill was money that was left over from eons ago.
Yeah, that was.
Oh,
Project that's long done. And they asked, when we first decided we wanted to set up this capital fund, the
right.
thought, was, well, we have this $8,700 lying around, let's put, that'll be the first dollars into
Right.
it. And we agreed to that, and the only reason that it still exists in this policy document is that the Board of Ed still had it in their head that we need a new and separate bank account, which would require a transfer. Because it's not there right now. If I'm able to convince them that that's a bad idea and that we should roll with the way things are so that we can use STIF properly, then that language could just go away. There's no reason.
I got it. I thought it was every year. The way I thought I heard it was that yearly there was that 2%.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, but that's related to this, yeah.
That's separate. So that we have two different things going on here with unexpended school funds at the end of the year. The 2% fund is, it's a cap, right? So if they've got a $4 million budget, right, they can put up to $200,000 into this fund. It's kind of their contingency fund. Then we're setting up yet another fund.
your math is a little off there.
Oh, yeah, that's terrible. That was bad math, 80 down. Yeah,
Right.
sorry, it's getting late and I need to go. But yeah, that was atrocious math. They'll come to a history major for numbers. Anyway, but yeah, long story short, this would be separate from that. That's a different thing.
And Bill, now they'll have two options, and maybe
Right.
maybe they won't even want to use the 2% anymore if we ever get the capital fund,
Yeah, I mean,
capital
maybe
account.
put a little bit of each or.
Right, I mean, you never know, so two
Right.
options.
So this document here, is another thing they should look at, obviously. But yeah, I think I've got my takeaways to about that.
Yeah, I'm guessing that you can take the documents, the input, the discussions we've had today, your
Yeah.
notes, go back,
Yep.
work with Shannon or wherever for the Board of Ed and see if we can revise it back. And find out if it's really, if they have some real points of concern, maybe we can come up with some creative ways to work on it.
Yeah, and it may be that, the next meeting, we have a from more that come, and maybe one of us attends their next, something like that. I almost went to their last meeting, I probably should have now, in retrospect. Because then maybe some of this will come up, but then again, not everything, not all of this is stuff I thought of.
It's good progress.
It's good to have it, yeah.
You guys did some good
We'll
work.
keep working on it, and I understand a bit about, there is some boilerplate in here that, should probably go back. It was pulled from, something else that isn't quite up. So anyway, are we good on that
I
policy?
think we're
I
good.
think-
I really apologize for that, I left my kids at home to come here.
No, that's
So
okay.
it's been 2 hours, I gotta run, I gotta go. So.
All right, thanks for coming in.
All right, thanks, guys.
Sorry, are we gonna go to the next thing? Is he gonna put it?
Well, we're gonna
in?
go.
Yeah,
Yeah, you wanna wait to talk about.
if we have, if it's gonna be 5 minutes, fine, but otherwise I
We'll
gotta.
try it. 6B is discussion to return to virtual meetings.
Oh, right,
And I just figured it could be a vote.
yeah.
In my opinion, for, having us all either all virtual or in one place. Although Bill I was able to hear him tonight. I just am in favor of the virtual. I feel like we're gonna get into some long meetings like this. So having the ability to work a long day, but then be there and do what we need to do and have the materials. I would hope we could go back to virtual. I think all the other town departments are still holding their meetings virtual.
Board of Ed.
Oh,
You
right.
live in person.
I was hoping to meet, and I didn't hear Kelly tonight. I know we had it in person, but, that's my take on it. Bill travels a lot. I know you travel. I know you have, no, I'm not.
Not so much.
Normally, I said that I would have kids, it just happened,
It's certainly-
1 week I needed to take.
So that's the issue. I just think.
It's certainly more convenient. I will say this, I'm in favor, and I voted to go to in-person
Yeah.
meetings last time. I'm okay with going back to virtual meetings if we develop a process for stopping the meeting and restarting if we have a
Right.
Just everything.
and terminating the meeting. We've got to conduct the town's business.
Mhm.
We've got to conduct the town's business. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with going back to doing virtual meetings as long as we have a process and procedure for returning to the meeting.
Yeah,
And that procedure may be that, we all, we try twice, we get hacked twice, we all come to the town. I don't know what it is. But if we have something, we can meet in my living room. I don't know. But we probably can't actually do that because that would have to be on the agenda.
yeah, I mean, last time.
But anyway,
Yeah, but I see what you're
you
saying.
need to have some process, and we got caught off guard last time, with no process,
Right.
and that caused a problem.
Yeah,
So I'm in favor of it, I'll support it, as long as we have some kind of process, which we do not need to decide tonight.
Right.
We need to come.
okay,
On the other end of the stick, I kinda like the in-person meetings, I think productivity is better, like there's less distractions at my house, there's, dogs barking, there's a lot of stuff going on. And,
yeah,
by the way, we just want kid to put one of their TikToks on that they don't know about or something, something crazy. And then the issue that happened before, like, we're gonna be able to prevent that. And like you said, we'll have a thing, but what if it keeps happening over and over?
Right, yeah, I think we need to have.
Log in and out.
It could be that was a one-time thing, but who knows?
Yeah.
it was very
I
rare.
think you build strong relationships in person, I don't know.
I mean, all our years,
Follow
it
along.
was that one, but it's a vulnerability, to be sure.
The other thing we could do is we could do hybrid meetings.
Which would.
It takes away some of the advantages of doing an in-person meeting. And for whoever's here, some of the advantages of doing virtual meetings.
Yeah.
Bill, what are your thoughts? Do you have an opinion on?
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of going back to in-person as well. I'm not going to be traveling anymore at the beginning of the year, but I do understand that there are times, especially coming up during the next 3 months, during the budget season, that obviously we're going to have weekly meetings again, and there may be times where people just can't, every single week get out of the house. And so I guess it'd be nice to have an option to do a virtual, although I see the benefit of doing all one or all the other. I really do see the virtue of having it one or the other. So I'm kind of wishy-washy, but I do understand, especially when we start doing it every single week during budget season, where it can be a lot to ask people to go out every single week at night. But
This works better than I thought it would.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, Bill, we can hear you very clearly. You seem to be able to hear us well. That's really good.
And I've
Gives me a little comfort with the hybrid idea.
Yeah.
Honestly, normally on a Wednesday night, the whole reason I've been Wednesday night guy is that typically I do not have my kids on a Wednesday night. It just so happened, my ex-wife's on a business trip this week and I had to have keep. Normally I wouldn't be complaining, you know, I wouldn't be trying to run out of here. So, and then I'd be fine. I'm fine coming out of town, I'll live a mile away, it's fine. So, but the flexibility issue is good.
We just
I
don't
think
know.
Mark's right, then we just all kind of agree, like, if it happens again, this is what we do.
Mhm.
You know, last time we had a hot dip, we all just kind of X'd out and went back in and we got away with it.
This is true. Over the shop value.
Yeah, well, you know, we made it work. but
Yeah, that
is
was unfortunate.
Yes,
No question, that was a pretty,
yeah.
Well, can I make a motion to at least see, and I hate, you know, I'm
Go
a
ahead,
passionate
go ahead.
person, so if people are one way, I'm gonna feel bad, but I'm gonna make the motion to have our meetings go back to virtual. Is that,
To be clear, it's just fully virtual, not hybrid.
it's too much for me,
Okay.
like, I really value
Just really
either
clear
we're
on
all on the screen together, or no offense, Bill, this was great, I'm glad it worked, or we're all together.
Okay.
You know, unless we
Just-
try,
just
we can make an agreement to try one virtual, if we
Well,
want to revisit it.
how about if we do this? I'm gonna make a suggestion, and you can decide whether you want this to be a motion.
Mhm.
You make the motion to go back to virtual, virtual meetings with the Board of Finance. With the understanding that at our discretion, we may have to make a meeting in person.
I like that.
I like that.
We may want to do that on our monthly meetings if we decide, you know, that it just makes sense, it works for everybody, but then we'll default to virtual meetings if.
Maybe we have a meeting with somebody coming in to present something, like say we're in a
Absolutely,
budget
right.
workshop meeting and we want Jay to come and explain the public works issue.
Yeah.
It can be better to be in person.
Okay, so,
So I'll second that.
yeah, we're going to virtual with the option of having,
But we can always decide to be in person.
Yeah.
Which I think is
thing.
already
Yeah.
a thing, but it's nice to have it in person.
Is there a
Any
time
more
frame that you could approve that? I mean,
Hmm?
is there a time frame for
Will
that?
we start with the next meeting?
You know,
No, I
in,
mean, as far
in
as,
theory, I think this is actually the kind of thing that's normally under the discretion of the chairman, probably. You could probably, I'm not sure
It's like
exactly
it's
how
fine.
much we'll sit down in
I
there,
know,
but I wanted to, I
How would
think
it
I think it's more,
Oh,
makes more sense.
I mean, we could assume.
we would still. So,
We could decide by email whether, in any given thing, you know, hey, I can't make it in
In
person.
time for the agenda
right,
to go
but
out.
remember, if you do it virtually, you have a 48-hour window
2 days.
to notify the public. So you would have to make that, like, you can call a special meeting on 24 hours notice. But it's harder to do that, you know, if it's a Zoom meeting, then you need 48 hours. So you would have to make that decision. If you're already Zoom and you wanna go to in person, you could probably do that 24 hours beforehand,
24 hours.
but you can't do the reverse.
Okay. Makes sense.
That's my understanding anyway.
Yeah, so I don't think we're really constrained, and it's not like we're making a substantive business decision, so if we all get together on Monday or Wednesday and say, hey, next week's meeting, we wanna do in person, we can easily do that. you know,
No, there's no reason.
Or
I
vice
think
versa.
that's always been.
Okay. Any more discussion on that motion? Yeah, I'll call for a vote, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, the motion passes. We'll go back to virtual meetings for the future, except under decision of the board to change to an in-person. Rob, thanks.
Thank you, I gotta run, thanks guys. Appreciate it. Eric, no disrespect to your administrator's report.
I think you need to make it up.
No worries.
The girls. Yeah.
No, they have too many treats already.
No, I don't.
Too many treats already.
Take one for yourself.
I think we're good with Cheryl, right? Yeah, I was gonna suggest earlier, you could probably think on, thank you very much. Okay, so moving on, approval of meeting minutes, this is for October 25th, 2023. Meeting minutes are in your packet. Anybody want to make a motion?
I make a
to approve
motion
the
to
meeting
accept
minutes?
the finance meeting minutes as presented.
Okay, we have a second,
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? After discussion, I guess we're going to. Okay. Administrators report, got kind of out of order. Do you have anything to administrators?
I don't have anything major. We did
Thank you, Cheryl.
encounter a roof leak at the fire department. On investigation, we realized the flat roof on the fire department, which unfortunately is only like 9 years old, has been installed quite incorrectly. That whole building was re-roofed 9 years ago. We have had numerous problems with it. Original contractors out of business because they suck. So we did just repair the flat roof or replace the flat roof yesterday. But that was under the threshold at which I needed to go to RFP. So I just kind of did it. We did get multiple bids. We took the low bidder. It was under $7,500 anyway, so there shouldn't be any issue with that. There hasn't been anything else major. You are aware as a board that we did get a steep grant for $500,000 for improvements at the ball field. That is winding its way through the Planning and Zoning Commission at the moment, because there needs to be a regulation change in the lighting regulations to allow what was in the steep grant application, which is lighting the soccer field, lighting for the pickleball courts. So they are weighing in on that. I don't know how they're going to decide that. Basically, it's a trade-off between aesthetics and functionality, whether they want to allow taller lights or not. Without allowing a taller light for the soccer field, it's frankly just not gonna happen. But there's no question that would change the character of that spot to do it. So that's why I referred it to them before we got any further in the process. So that grant is out. We did authorize the grant, the study grant for the Route 316 connectivity. We picked a company called Barton and LaJudas. They're out of Glastonbury to do that. That is under a really serious time constraint right now. So, but the problem is, because it involves state funding, we need approval before we can sign a contract with the CHRO, the Commission on Human Rights, which is a giant, it is a time-consuming thing. So, and that flies in the face of the fact that we needed to do it quickly. So what I did with the town's attorney is I actually drafted 2 contracts. One, a quick and dirty temporary contract, which we signed, that we would pay only out of town funds. So I authorized paying them $500. So we have an official contract in place for liability purposes. And we've submitted the full contract to them. They've approved it. And then we've sent it off to the state CHRO. So presuming they approve that at some point, we'll sign the actual contract with them. But we do have a contract in place and they are working on the project. So those are the 2 big things going on with that. Obviously, the community center is going, moderately well. A few hiccups, but nothing, really catastrophic. And we're on budget for that to stay under $1 million. The other thing that is an issue, which I'm not sure how to address at this point, is I did ask for a Department of Labor ruling on the construction of the parking garage for the senior transportation. My attitude, my position all along has been, since we're tearing down a building completely and we are tearing, we're not reusing the foundation, we're not reusing the parking lot, we're not reusing utilities, we're reusing nothing, that the majority of that is considered new construction, and therefore we have the Department of Labor threshold of $1 million before we have to pay prevailing wage.
Okay,
They've given me an official determination that, nope, that's a renovation project as far as they're concerned. So I'm working with the town's attorney to see whether we can fight that, because that is gonna cause a significant cost to us. Because as soon as you make it a prevailing wage project, your total project costs go up, 20 to 30%. So that's probably a $75,000 hit to the town if that is taking place. I am kind of working with our, legislators also to see whether the state can finally, do something about the current prevailing wage laws. The threshold for renovation was established in 1991 and hasn't changed. Obviously, it's a lot more expensive to build things today than it was in 1991. So if they change the thresholds, we're in good shape. If not, we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with that.
I didn't know, I didn't.
And that's all I got, unless you have questions for me.
Yeah, I'm needed somewhere, so unless we're gonna wrap it, I'm gonna.
Probably there. Do we have the liaison reports?
Thank you.
Board open discussion. I do have one item. And we were all copied on this, I think, but we got it from Carol Lee, the bleacher quote.
Yep.
And I didn't think about that. We should have probably had that added to the agenda, but we had enough to talk about this time. So they're asking for approval to move forward with that purchase, even though they could only get one firm quote, I think. So we could vote on it. Are you comfortable they did due diligence and check through? Are you involved in that or not?
I was only peripherally involved. Frankly, I've got enough other,
Yeah.
irons in the fire that I have not been. I know they went after a couple of companies, but basically what they're doing is they're not completely replacing the bleachers, they're just replacing parts of the bleachers. And by doing that, there's really only one vendor, which is the vendor that produces the bleachers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So I think, Brian can probably speak to that better because he's on the rec commission.
Yeah, so it's $12,800. She listed several
Yeah, I did.
companies that they did. I mean, it's to replace the plastic seats with wood.
All the plastic, right?
Yeah,
They
I
just
think so.
replaced all the plastic ends.
Yeah, but not
That's a
the
good
structure,
price,
so.
cause the other plastic ones kept breaking.
Okay. I'm gonna make a motion to approve the expenditure, even though we couldn't get the additional quotes. They should move forward. We'd already approved
Right, we
back to do
approved
it,
it,
but
it's
we
right around
normally,
that.
this is kind of approving them to move forward with an exception to the purchasing policy.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No abstentions? Okay, thank you. Call that one done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. No problem. Any other board open discussion? Okay, any correspondence? Going correspondence, I am, so quote, public speak? Nothing?
One cookie?
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
I think Brian got you first.
Second.
All right, I'll second it.
I think we got a laugh.
Yeah,
All right.
Hey.
I get everybody's sorts. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, everybody. Good meeting. Not going on. Appreciate everybody's time.